This video was sponsored by Headphones.com. Headphones.com is a premium online retailer of headphones, amplifiers, speakers, DACs, all sorts of different high-quality audiophile equipment. They have an amazing customer support, a great chat assistant, really good policies in place for their website, and they are where I would recommend picking up any headphone that we talk about today, including the MM-100. Now, Headphones is sponsoring this video, but I'm not being paid or asked to say anything good or bad. All thoughts and opinions, like every video, are going to be my own. We just looked at the MM-500 a little while ago. This is the mini version of that, the little brother of that headphone. This gets you a couple of things. One, it gets you surprisingly close to that sound signature for a fraction of the cost, being over $1,000 cheaper than that headphone. Two, this actually gets you a pretty good studio quality headphone for the price. And three, this gets you the best build that Audeze makes at any price. Let's go ahead and talk about the build first. Now, except for one thing, this is the best build that Audeze currently makes, in my opinion. One, they've ditched the mini XLR. I hate that connection point. Two, this chassis has much less clamp force than the newer chassis style that they're seemingly going with, which always has too much clamp force regardless of the design for some reason. Three, the cup and yoke mechanism just feel really, really solid. And over the top of the suspension strap that they have, they also have a second layer of padding on the headband, which the cable runs through. The pads, in my opinion, are also really amazing, large squared off holes for your ears. The one critical error that they've made with this build, but surprisingly not with the Maxwell for some reason, is non-removable pads. Quite frankly, at this point, this is honestly just pissing me off. They've clearly demonstrated with the Maxwell that they're capable of building a really good headphone with removable pads, and it seems like they are just at this point outright refusing to do that for some reason. So that is a level of frustration that I'll probably save for another day. But outside of that, I think that this is probably the best Audeze build that you can currently get. It's a lot lighter than the Maxwell, but has all of the same benefits, except for the removable pads. Now, this has a 3.5 millimeter input that you only have to plug in on one side and it will transfer to the other side. And similar to other studio headphones like the Rode NTH-100, this can be plugged into either side. Now, when you put this up against some comps, the build here for the money is honestly very impressive. Headphones of this price tag like HC660S2 or comparable planar magnetic headphones like the Sundara, they just really do not stack up to the build quality that Audeze is currently offering here. So for a $400 headphone, the build is very, very impressive and is probably one of the most comfortable builds that Audeze currently makes. And the last thing I want to touch on is the Manny Marroquin collaboration that they have going on here with the MM-100 and the MM-500. Now, when it comes to sound quality, much like its bigger brother, this has a heavy emphasis on a studio sound. It's not necessarily oriented towards an audiophile sound. You're not going to find heavily emphasized sound staging. You're not going to find heavily emphasized bass or super warm and lush mid-range. You are going to find a very studio, precision, and information-based sound quality. I would say as far as neutral headphones like the HC660S2, for example, this pretty much is on par with that for neutrality, but the tuning of it is slightly different. This newer style of Audeze neutral, which is shared with headphones like the LCD5, the MM-500, and the MM-100, they all kind of carry a similar sound signature, oddly enough, even despite the massive differences in price tag. But one of the few differences, one of the downsides to this headphone versus those other ones, one of the things that separates its price tag justifiably, is the dynamics. They are good, but they are not great. This headphone's dynamics, again, lean away from an audiophile appeal and more towards a studio appeal. So this has sort of a workaround benefit if you want to view it from a positive lens. What is that benefit? Well, because the dynamics are somewhat compressed on this headphone, not super compressed, but more compressed than headphones like the LCD5 or the MM-500, you get a lot of background details that show very easily in the music. So sounds that would normally be faded away into a very low volume are actually really easy to catch when it comes to mixing and mastering. So for a studio use, this is actually a benefit. For a listener, sometimes when you're listening to music that wasn't perfectly recorded, you're really gonna know. And when it comes to that neutral honesty that the MM-500 and the MM-100 share, you really are going to be punished with bad music and really benefited with good music. So for the next few regions, I want to look at some graphs. Now, headphones.com is a very good resource for different graphs of different headphones. I would highly recommend checking them out below. I'm using their measurements to kind of talk about this headphone a little bit and kind of help describe some areas that we're going to talk about in the frequency response. When it comes to the bass response, you can see that there's a slight slope off. Now, this has two effects. One, it makes it very clear for the mid-range to pop through and very clear for the top end to pop through, and it doesn't muddy up that sound signature. But it does have a downside of feeling a little bit dry, especially if you're coming from even some of Audeze's own headphones, like the LCD2C or any of the LCD line, except for the LCD5. Any of the legacy LCD headphones have, in my opinion, better bass response in this because they seem to be as clean, but just more forward. Not a huge fan of the downward slope here. Personally, I'd prefer as much bass quantity as you can get, as long as you're maintaining quality. Now, the mid-range is very confident and very forward, but you do compensate a little bit for the ear gain section, which we'll talk about in a second. But as an overall category, between about 100 hertz to about 1500 hertz, this is a very competent, really good sounding mid-range. Now, because of how the imaging and the presentation is happening on this headphone, when you compare it to a headphone like the HD600, this doesn't quite have the super intimate vocal focus like that headphone has, but it has other benefits like a wider sound stage, like a more variable kind of imaging position for different instruments that aren't just the vocalist. So when it comes to those two headphones, I'd say that if you're mixing and mastering vocals specifically, the HD600 would be better. But if you're mixing an overall song, I think that the understanding that the MM-100 gives you is a little bit superior. Now that ear gain. Why they continue to boost this area so much, and you can see this in the frequency response of both the MM-100 and 500. And not only does this give them a similar sound profile, but it provides the same complaints. And I see this complaint happening not only with myself, but with a lot of other people. By the time around 3K actually hits your eardrum, it's been kind of enhanced by an ear's natural gain. That's why it's called ear gain. Now, when headphone measures like these do with a stronger ear gain than a lot of other headphones, you hear that area even more. And for certain people, this can be no problem at all. And for others like me, they can be a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more of an irritant to them than some other people. So I'm not a huge fan of this being boosted because I find myself compensating for the volume of about 3K. So when I'm listening to something and I'm trying to adjust volume to a pleasing level without it being too loud, I find myself compensating to this ear gain level. And that means all of the other levels that aren't quite as forward as it get brought down in volume. So for example, the already reduced bass response of this headphone gets even more reduced because I'm compensating for a higher frequency of around 3K, so that's not too harsh for my ears. Your reaction to this will vary a lot from mine. Everybody's ears are different, but that was a complaint that and I've seen a few other people have with the MM-100 and 500. Now, when it comes to details, this is a very detailed headphone, but the way that it's delivered, it's not actually as obvious as something like a Sundara. Now, this is a little bit of a hi-fi versus studio headphone sound signature comparison. Because with the Sundara, what gives it a more detailed sound is that it's got more forward treble response. This gives it wider sound staging and more apparent detail for a lot of things. Almost all instruments will seem a little bit more detailed in the top end. This little sprinkles in the top end, all that type of stuff, all those little tiny like ticks and hits and stuff like that will come through and pop through a little bit better on the Sundara. And I would say that if you're chasing details like that, Sundara is the winner all day. But when it comes to this headphone, it is a very detailed headphone. I wouldn't say that it's under detailed for the price category, but some other headphones do show off details a little bit better. The way to think about this headphone is that if you're into the tuning curve that this offers, this is going to be the benefit for this headphone. If you're into other things like sound staging or details, I think other headphones are going to be better suited for those jobs. Okay, so a couple conclusions and a couple comparisons here. When it comes to Sundara, which I think is going to be this thing's biggest competitions, there's a difference of $50 and both are very, very good, but for two different reasons. I would say that when it comes to build quality, the Sundara is way less good. It is significantly cheaper built, but I think that for most users, the Sundara will actually probably sound better. It's got wider sound staging, it's got more impressive bass response, it sounds clearer and cleaner. If you're into a better build, or if you're into a more studio neutral sound, I do think that this offers a little bit more of a neutral sound signature, but you do again have to deal with some downsides. It's not as wide sounding for soundstage, and it's got that 3K ear gain. Within Audeze's own lineup, my personal recommendation here is to either get the Maxwell if you can deal with being a closed wireless headphone. I think that's an amazing headphone for the money. It's just great, period. And even though the build is better, for sound alone, I'm going to skip this and hit the LCD2C. Those would be my two recommendations for under $1,000, unless you are into exactly what this offers. Now down below at headphones.com, the sponsor of today's video, thank you very much. For your ease of access, you can find links to every headphone that I talked about today, all the Sennheisers, all the Audezes, and all the Hyphemans that I mentioned in today's video. You can find links down below. Thanks again, Headphones, for sponsoring today's video. I appreciate you guys' support now more than ever. I have a huge announcement coming soon, and when that happens, I'll see you guys.